in Mahayana tradition, which came later. It's this was, later developed. It's found in Vietnam, China, Korea, Japan, amongst other places. In that tradition, it's very clear that monks take a vow to not consume animals. So places that we operate in, like Vietnam, where we have Mahayana monks, they're not consuming animal flesh, they're consuming eggs and dairy. But with the Mahayana tradition, there's still pretty clear text about not consuming animals. And so we have the Lankavatara Sutra. And I do want to preface this by saying I'm not an expert in Buddhism. I'm still
Okay.
newer to
All
Buddhism.
right.
But
Well, if there's
with the
anybody
text,
listening who knows a million times more than I do, and
let us know.
they can take that into account, and I'm sure they will be generous about it.
Thank you. So we do know that the Lankavatara Sutra, that it clearly says, let the bodhisattva who is disciplining himself to attain compassion refrain from eating flesh. And this is why monks in the Mahayana tradition are not consuming animals.
Is that true? Even in this situation where they're given, they're supposed to beg for their food, basically, and if they're given flesh, even then they won't consume it.
They will not consume flesh. No, flesh is
Okay,
not allowed
it's
at the temples.
absolutely verboten.
Forbidden.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. But they are given eggs and dairy, which obviously is something that we're working on as well. But it's important to remember that when these teachings were written, factory farming didn't exist. Like you said, the Buddha didn't know about factory farming, which is probably why it specifically said eating flesh and not, animal products. So as someone who has investigated many egg and dairy farms myself, I wholeheartedly believe that the Buddha would have opposed
Of course.
them because the standard practices on these farms, they're not in alignment with the teachings of compassion and non-harming.
Oh, it is extraordinary how people can interpret religion. It really is.
Mhm.
What is the goal of a practicing Buddhist? Like, why are people Buddhist? Does it like explain the mystery of the world? That's one of the reasons for religion. About, is there a belief in an afterlife? Is it just how to live a better life? And I guess for different people, it's different things. But I'm
Absolutely.
just wondering, like, in Christianity, which I grew up in, there's this concept of sin. There's a concept of an afterlife. It's like I feel like it's very different, but I don't really understand this basic thing of like, because I always think with Christians, well, what I would like to tell them is that clearly God created these animals and they're sentient, and He meant you to figure this out, that you're not supposed to eat them, so you're going to hell. That's how like to put it. You're just going to hell, so straighten up. But I don't feel like in Buddhism you can do that.
Everything you said is true. It's different for different people. It's different for different countries, different cultures. There are some people who do believe in different realms, that where we go to a different realm after this, and that's why you have to have good karma. Obviously, reincarnation is believed by a lot of Buddhists around the world. Here in the Western world, and the lineage that I follow is more about one, becoming a better person, but also helping everyone around you attain nirvana, which is ultimate enlightenment. And so it really does vary from person to person. But instead of in Christianity, as you mentioned, we can tell people if you cause harm, you have hell. That's a possibility for you. But even here in the West, people believe in karma, and if you're causing harm, intentional or not intentional, which I think at this day and age, most people know what happens to animals in farms and slaughterhouses. You know, we're risking that karma, which is not a reason to do something just because there's a threat of something happening to
It does
you.
seem to be a reason for a lot of people, though. I think it
Yeah,
helps in the argument.
yeah, definitely. But I do think it's just about following the real teachings of the Buddha. I mean, the Buddha himself, he grew up in a very privileged family. He was very rich, he was very sheltered, and he wanted to go and see what was out there. He wanted to open himself up to suffering. And that included seeing death, sickness. He had never seen these things. And so as an organization, we're also asking Buddhists to open themselves up to the suffering, which is the reality animals endure in our food systems. We're simply asking them to, take a look into these farms and learn what's going on, and ask yourself, does that align with these teachings that I hold so dearly?
Yeah, and clearly this standard excuse that, well, it wasn't done for me, that's just a very weak argument. I mean, almost anybody could see that. Obviously, you have a role.
Absolutely.
Are there any Buddhists who just aren't interested in animals at all? Like don't take the position that animals are among the beings who matter? Or is that a standard across the entire practice?
It's a standard across the entire practice. It's very clear. There's so many other scriptures that I could quote, but specifically they say beings with feathers, beings with scales, so many. And actually, we have a resource page. It's the FAQ. It was created by a PhD in Buddhist studies, Greg Schmidt. He's a contributor of ours. But on our website, you can actually go through and find the top rebuttals that Buddhists give you. So, should Buddhists be vegan or vegetarian? And we have all of the scriptures that actually support not eating animals there. But it's a really good resource. I highly recommend everyone go look into it, or send people who are Buddhist or on a Buddhist path there.
So, I mean, we kind of touched on this, but I just like to revisit it now that we're deeper into this conversation. What is the reception to this message? I mean, how does it vary in different countries? But of course, I'm particularly interested in the US because that's where most of our listeners are. Like, do people hear you? And do you often have an opportunity to give this message to people who aren't already on board? Because you mentioned that you kind of have to couch it in an eco sense, which makes me feel like there is resistance to the well, animals matter argument, even among Buddhists.
Absolutely. We get the most resistance here in the United States. In Sri Lanka, I've been to our projects 3 times, and seeing the presentations, it's very, very common for people to leave the presentations crying because our regional coordinators show videos, not intense videos, not things that are filmed in
Right, right.
slaughterhouses, but just a mother's love, maybe like a baby cow
Yeah.
being taken away from her mom, and how they stress and cry when that happens. And it really just does just open up their hearts and minds to seeing the connections between what they're putting into their bodies, and how that goes against the teachings of the Buddha. But in Vietnam, there is there is pushback, but it really is just the health aspects, which is why we're working with the doctors in Thailand. It, People are really receptive because they just don't know. Like, they truly just don't know how bad things are for
Yeah.
animals there,
Yeah.
and they didn't know that this food that they were taught their whole lives is the diet of the affluent, that's going to be the most nutritious for them, is actually causing harm. But yeah, here in the U.S., they a lot of Buddhists don't want to talk about it. It's incredibly taboo. They're afraid of bringing it up. They don't want to ostracize their followers, and we're struggling here. But we're doing it. We're making it work, and we are launching an all beings coalition, and it really is poised to become the biggest Buddhist coalition in the world, where we're uniting the most influential and venerated Buddhist voices. So that could be a monastic, a scholar, organizations in the world, to take a public stance against factory farming. And we're hoping that this is going to inspire countless Buddhists to follow their example. We currently have folks like Tara Brach. She's written
Of
Radical
course.
Acceptance. You've
Yeah.
seen her book everywhere. Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, who has translated a lot of the text, and it's very commonly used here in the West. David Loy, who quite literally wrote the book about eco-dharma, and others. And we really just want to get these venerated voices to publicly advocate for compassionate food systems, and reduce animal suffering.
That is great. Are a lot of is a lot of the leadership more on board with the animal message, or is there even resistance among the more powerful voices in American Buddhism?
It is mixed. I think it's the same thing with the U.S. centers, where a lot of the powerful voices are afraid of alienating their followers, which is understandable in a sense, but it's also, we have to understand that we're not living by the teachings of the Buddha when we're not talking about what's happening to the animals, and that's why we're putting this group together to make it less taboo, to make it more mainstream, and hope that that makes some good changes in the near future.
I just think this is incredibly fertile ground for sowing these seeds incredibly. All right, I have a few questions for people who are in different positions. Let's start off first with if people are listening who are already practicing Buddhists and already part of a community of some sort or the other. But they haven't found the vegan community because apparently that's pretty damn hard to find.